Everyone at the royal banquet ignored the vampire king's crying daughter, too afraid to approach. The waitress broke every rule when she knelt and gently wiped the child's tears. What she didn't know, that one act of kindness revealed a forgotten power in her blood, and the king hasn't let her leave the palace since. The chandeliers above the crimson court cast a red glow across the ballroom, their crystals made from frozen blood that never melted. Lila had learned not to look up at them too long. 3 months working here, and she still couldn't get used to the way they seemed to pulse like beating hearts. She moved between tables with practiced silence, refilling goblets with dark wine that smelled metallic and wrong. The immortal nobles barely noticed her. To them, humans were furniture that walked. "More bread for table 7, hissed Marcus, the head server, shoving a basket into her hands. "And don't make eye contact. Lord Vesper complained about you last week." Lila nodded, keeping her head down. Eye contact was considered a challenge among vampires. A human making eye contact could lose more than her job. The banquet hall buzzed with political gossip. Someone had betrayed someone in the southern provinces. A trade route had been seized. Accusations flew like knives across the tables, though everyone smiled with their sharp teeth showing. At the far end of the hall, on an elevated dais of black marble, sat King Darius himself. Lila had only seen him from a distance before. He looked exactly like the portraits, pale skin that seemed carved from moonlight, dark hair swept back from a face too beautiful to be entirely real, and eyes that held centuries of boredom. He wore black and crimson robes that probably cost more than her entire village had earned in a decade. He wasn't eating. He wasn't even pretending to listen to the ancient vampire whispering in his ear. He simply stared ahead with the expression of someone who had seen this same night 1,000 times before. Then Lila heard it. A small, broken sound that didn't belong in a room full of predators. A child crying. She turned her head slightly, searching for the source. There, at the edge of the dais, partially hidden by the king's throne, sat a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with pale blonde curls and a black velvet dress that matched her father's robes. She clutched a stuffed bat toy to her chest, and silent tears rolled down her cheeks. The entire hall had gone still. Lila realized with creeping horror that every vampire in the room had noticed. They stood frozen, goblets halfway to lips, conversations dying mid-sentence. But no one moved. No one approached. They simply stared at the crying princess with expressions ranging from fear to disgust to carefully blank indifference. Even the king didn't react. He sat perfectly still, though his jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. They're all too afraid, Lila realized. No one dares approach a royal vampire, not even to comfort a child. The little girl's shoulders shook. Fresh tears spilled over her cheeks, and she made that sound again. A soft, heartbroken whimper that reminded Lila painfully of her youngest sister. She didn't think. Thinking would have stopped her. Lila set down her tray and crossed the ballroom floor. The whispers started immediately, sharp and hissing like steam from a kettle. Someone grabbed at her sleeve, but she pulled away. Marcus's voice cut through the silence. "Stop. You can't." But Lila was already climbing the 3 steps to the dais. The king's eyes shifted to her. Up close, they weren't just dark, they were endless, like staring into deep wells where something ancient lived at the bottom. For a moment, she forgot how to breathe. Then the little girl sobbed again, and Lila remembered why she was there. She knelt beside Princess Serafina, pulling a clean handkerchief from her apron pocket. The child looked up at her with red-rimmed eyes that held far too much pain for someone so young. "Hey there," Lila whispered, keeping her voice soft and warm. "That's a very nice bet you have." Serafina blinked, surprised that someone had spoken to her. "His name is Shadow," the princess said quietly, her voice barely audible. "Shadow is a perfect name." Lila gently wiped the tears from the child's cheeks, her touch featherlight. "Do you know what my grandmother used to tell me when I cried?" The little girl shook her head. She said that tears are just the heart's way of speaking when words aren't enough. And that's okay. You're allowed to cry." Something shifted in Serafina's expression, like a door opening just a crack in a locked room. She leaned slightly into Lila's touch, and more tears came, but these seemed different somehow. Lighter. That's when Lila noticed the mark on the child's wrist. A black sigil, twisted and sharp like thorns, wrapped around her pale skin. It pulsed with a sickly light, and Lila felt cold just looking at it. But as she continued wiping the tears away, as she smiled at the girl and adjusted her hair with gentle fingers, something impossible happened. The black sigil flickered. For just a heartbeat, the edges seemed to fade, turning from ink black to charcoal gray. Lila didn't see it clearly. She was focused on the child's face. But King Darius saw it. His eyes widened, and his hand gripped the arm of his throne so hard the wood cracked. "What are you?" he breathed, but the words were too quiet for anyone else to hear. The spell broke when Lady Morgana, the head advisor, swept forward with her crimson gown billowing like blood in water. "Seize her," she commanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "This human has touched the princess. She's violated sacred law." Guards materialized from the shadows, their hands reaching for Lila's arms. But before they could grab her, Serafina did something no one expected. She wrapped her small arms around Lila's neck and held on tight. "No," the princess said, her voice stronger than before. "She's nice. Don't take her away." The guards froze, uncertain. You didn't forcibly remove someone from the princess's embrace without permission. All eyes turned to King Darius. He rose slowly from his throne, and the entire room seemed to shrink. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute authority. "Let her go." Lady Morgana's face twisted. "But, Your Majesty, she—" "I said let her go." His eyes hadn't left Lila. "This woman will be kept under royal watch. Place her in the East Wing chambers. No one is to harm her or question her without my direct permission." He paused, and the ghost of something that might have been hope flickered across his ancient face. "We may have use for her yet." The whispers followed Lila through the marble corridors like hungry ghosts. 2 guards escorted her to the East Wing, the part of the palace reserved for guests the king wanted to keep close, but not quite trust. Her new room was larger than her family's entire cottage, with a canopy bed draped in silver silk and windows that overlooked moonlit gardens. It was beautiful. It was also a cage. "Don't try the door," one guard said flatly. "It's watched. You leave when the king says you leave." The lock clicked behind them, and Lila was alone. She sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling now that the shock had worn off. What had she done? She'd broken protocol, touched a royal vampire, and somehow, the entire court had seen something in that moment that terrified them. The mark on the princess's wrist. It changed. She hadn't imagined it. The black sigil had flickered when she touched Serafina, like a candle flame disturbed by breath. But that was impossible. Lila was nobody, a waitress from a farming village who'd come to the capital looking for work after her father died. She had no magic, no special blood, nothing that would explain what happened. Except her grandmother's words echoed in her memory. "Our family comes from old stock, Lila. The kind that remembers when humans and vampires weren't enemies. The Light Mother watches over us still." Lila had always thought it was just old woman talk, stories to make their poverty feel less meaningless. But now she wondered. She moved to the window and pressed her forehead against the cool glass, watching the gardens below where night-blooming flowers opened like pale stars. Sleep found her there, still sitting by the window. And with sleep came the dream. 3 floors below, in a circular tower room lit only by candles, King Darius spread ancient scrolls across his desk. He hadn't visited this room in decades. It had belonged to his father's father, the scholar king who had obsessed over prophecies and legends until madness claimed him. The other vampires thought Darius had sealed it out of respect. They were wrong. He'd sealed it because some knowledge was dangerous. Now he broke those seals without hesitation. The scrolls were older than most kingdoms, written in languages that had died centuries ago. But Darius had lived through those centuries. He remembered the words. His fingers traced over passages about the War of Separation, when vampires and humans had torn their alliance apart in blood and betrayal. Most focused on battles and treaties. But one scroll, brittle and yellowed, spoke of something else. In the final days before the breaking, there walked among us the tear healers of Solara. Born of mortal women blessed by the Light Mother, they carried compassion as their weapon. Where they touched, curses loosened. Where they wept, darkness fled. The last of their order perished in the temple massacre, and with them died the only bridge between Fong and flesh. Darius's hand clenched. The temple massacre. He'd been there, centuries ago. A young prince commanded by his father to help slaughter the healers before they could end the curse that gave vampires their power over humans. He remembered the temple burning, remembered the screams. He told himself it was necessary. That power required sacrifice. But now his daughter lay dying from that same curse, the one that marked royal vampire children, feeding on their life force to maintain the immortal strength of their bloodline. Seraphina had maybe a year left. He'd consulted every dark mage, every blood sorcerer. None could break it. Until tonight, when a human waitress with gentle hands had made the impossible sigil flicker. Could she be descended from them? He wondered. Could the tear healer's bloodline have survived? He pulled out another scroll, this one describing the healer's abilities. They draw power from empathy itself, turning emotional connection into pure light. Their touch does not destroy darkness. It remembers what lived before the darkness came. They do not heal wounds. They remind the wounded of wholeness. At the bottom of the scroll was a faded illustration, a woman with kind eyes, her hands glowing with soft radiance as she touched a kneeling vampire's face. The vampire was crying. Darius stared at that image for a long time. Then he rolled up the scrolls and extinguished the candles, his mind made up. Whatever Lila was, whatever power she carried, he would unlock it, even if it meant confronting truths he'd buried for centuries. His daughter's life depended on it. In her dream, Lila walked through ruins. Moonlight poured through broken columns of white stone, illuminating murals that time had nearly erased. She saw images of humans and vampires standing together, their hands joined, not as master and servant, as equals. At the center of the ruins stood a pool of still water, perfectly circular, reflecting stars she didn't recognize. A woman appeared on the opposite side, tall and luminous, with eyes that held both sorrow and infinite kindness. "You've forgotten," the woman said, her voice like wind through leaves. "But your blood remembers. Only compassion breaks blood. Only love ends what hate began." "I don't understand," Lila whispered. "You will," the woman smiled sadly. "The child is dying, Lila, and you're the only one who can save her. But first, you must remember who you are." Lila woke with tears on her cheeks and a single word burning in her mind: Solara. Lila spent the entire next day alone in her room, pacing between the window and the door. Servants brought food on silver trays, but she could barely eat. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw that ruined temple and the woman made of light. Solara. The word felt familiar, like a song she'd forgotten, but her heart still knew. As evening fell, painting the sky deep purple, the door finally opened. It wasn't a guard. It was King Darius himself. Up close, without the crowd of nobles around them, he seemed different. Still terrifying, still ancient and powerful, but there was something raw in his expression. Something almost human. "Come with me," he said quietly. "Please." The please surprised her more than anything. Kings didn't say please to servants. She followed him through winding corridors she didn't recognize, going deeper into the palace. They passed no guards, no servants. Whatever this was, he wanted no witnesses. He stopped at a door painted with silver stars and moons, a child's door. "My daughter hasn't laughed in 3 years," Darius said without looking at her. His hand rested on the door handle, but he didn't open it yet. The curse feeds on joy. Every moment of happiness she feels, it devours. So she stopped feeling happiness altogether. She stopped trying. His voice cracked on the last word, and Lila saw something she never thought possible, a vampire king on the edge of breaking. Last night, after you left, she smiled. Just for a moment. It's been so long. I almost didn't recognize the expression. He finally turned to face her, and his eyes held desperate hope. I need to know if it was real. If you can truly affect the curse. Will you try again? Lila's throat felt tight. I don't know what I did. I don't know if I can repeat it.
Try anyway.
Please. There was that word again. He opened the door. Princess Seraphina's room was exactly what Lila expected, filled with toys and books, beautiful tapestries showing fairy tales, a bed shaped like a castle. But the little girl sitting in the middle of it all looked small and gray, like a flower slowly dying in darkness. Until she saw Lila. You came back. Seraphina's face lit up. Father said you might not. He said I shouldn't hope, but I did anyway. Lila's heart squeezed. She crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. Of course I came back. I promised Shadow I'd visit, didn't I? The stuffed bat sat on the pillow, and Seraphina giggled, a sound like bells that made even the king inhale sharply. Hold her hand, Darius said from the doorway, his voice carefully controlled. If you're willing. Lila looked at Seraphina. May I? The princess nodded and extended her small hand, the one with the black sigil wrapped around her wrist like poisonous vines. The moment their fingers touched, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no flash of light, no thunderclap. But Lila felt warmth flow through her, the same warmth she'd felt when comforting her siblings, when helping her grandmother tend to sick neighbors, when holding her father's hand as he died. It was the warmth of caring about someone else's pain more than your own comfort. The black sigil began to glow. Not with darkness, with light trapped inside darkness, like stars behind storm clouds. Seraphina gasped. It doesn't hurt, Papa. It doesn't hurt. And then she laughed. It was pure and bright and utterly joyful, the laugh of a child who'd forgotten what it felt like to be happy. She threw her arms around Lila's neck and laughed until tears streamed down her face. Good tears this time, ones that washed away pain instead of expressing it. Darius made a sound like he'd been struck. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside the bed, his hand reaching out to touch his daughter's face, as if confirming she was real. Seraphina, he whispered, and his voice broke completely. I'm okay, Papa, she said, still giggling. I'm actually okay. For several minutes, they stayed like that, father and daughter holding each other while Lila kept her hand in Seraphina's, maintaining the connection that kept the curse at bay. Finally, Darius looked up at Lila with an expression of wonder and fear. Guards, he called out. Leave us. Seal the corridor. No one enters for any reason. Footsteps retreated, and they were alone. Who are you? He asked Lila. Truly. I'm nobody. Just a waitress. No, he stood, helping his daughter settle back against her pillows. The sigil had faded back to black, but it looked lighter somehow, less solid. What you just did. It's impossible. Unless he studied her face like he was searching for something. Your family. Where do they come from? A farming village. 3 days' ride south. Before that, your grandparents. Great-grandparents. Lila frowned, trying to remember. My grandmother never spoke much about her past.
She was always secretive about it.
But she used to pray every morning to someone she called the Light Mother. She'd say our family was blessed, that we had old blood in our veins. Darius went very still. The Light Mother. You know it. I know it, he said quietly. It's what the Order of Solara called their goddess. The healers who could break curses with compassion alone. He looked at her with new eyes. They were all killed centuries ago. Or so we thought. What are you saying? I'm saying, Lila, that you might be the last of them. The last tear healer in existence. The words hung in the air like prophecy. And somewhere deep in Lila's chest, something ancient and sleeping began to wake. The dreams came every night after that, growing stronger and more vivid. In them, Lila walked through the same moonlit ruins, but each time she saw more details. The murals on the broken columns showed stories: a vampire child healed by gentle hands, a human village saved from plague by immortal strength, two peoples building something beautiful together. Before the breaking, Lila thought in the dreams, somehow knowing the words were true. Before we forgot how to love each other. On the third night, the woman made of light appeared again, but this time she didn't speak. She simply pointed to something carved into the stone floor, a symbol that looked like a teardrop cradled by hands, with a sun rising behind it. "Find the truth," the woman whispered as the dream began to fade. "Find yourself." Lila woke gasping. The symbol burned into her mind's eye. She'd spent 3 days in the palace now, mostly confined to her room. Darius visited each evening, bringing Serafina with him. Each time Lila held the child's hand, the princess grew stronger, more alive. The black sigil was definitely fading, not gone, but lighter, like ink washing away in rain. But Darius had said nothing more about the Order of Solara. He watched Lila with careful, calculating eyes, clearly wrestling with some decision he wasn't ready to share. Lila was tired of waiting. If she truly was descended from these tear healers, if she truly carried their power, then she needed to understand what that meant. And there was only one place in the palace that might hold those answers. The royal library. Marcus, the head server who'd been surprisingly kind to her despite everything, had mentioned it once. 3 floors of books going back 1,000 years. The king never goes there anymore. Says it reminds him of things better left forgotten. Things better left forgotten were exactly what Lila needed to find. She waited until the early hours of dawn, when even vampires grew drowsy and guards changed shifts. The door to her room wasn't locked anymore. Darius had lifted that restriction after the second night. She slipped into the corridor wearing a borrowed cloak, moving with the silence she'd learned as a waitress. The library wasn't hard to find. She followed the smell of old paper and dust, climbing a spiral staircase that seemed to go on forever. The doors were massive and carved with scenes of battle, but they opened silently at her touch. Inside, rows of shelves stretched into darkness, lit only by dying candles in sconces that probably hadn't been changed in months. The air tasted stale and forgotten. Lila began searching, running her fingers along leather spines, squinting at titles written in languages she couldn't read. How was she supposed to find anything in this maze? Then she saw it, a door at the far end of the library, partially hidden behind a tapestry. Something pulled her toward it, the same inexplicable tugging she'd felt in her dreams. The door was locked, but when she touched the handle, it clicked open as if recognizing her. Impossible, she thought. But she'd stopped believing in impossible 3 days ago. The room beyond was small and circular, its walls covered entirely in murals. And these weren't ancient and faded. They'd been preserved somehow, still bright with color despite obvious age. Lila's breath caught. The murals showed the same scenes from her dreams. The temple, the pool of starlit water, humans and vampires living together in harmony. And in the center of the largest mural, painted with such care that every detail seemed alive, was a woman. She wore white robes and held her hands outstretched, glowing with soft light. Her face was kind and strong, with dark hair falling past her shoulders. Around her, both humans and vampires knelt, not in worship, but in gratitude. Beneath the mural, words were carved in a language Lila didn't know, but somehow understood. The first oracle of tears. She who remembered love when all chose hate. Mother of compassion. Founder of Solara. Lila stepped closer, her heart pounding. The woman's face. It was like looking in a mirror. Not exactly the same. This woman was older, wiser, but the resemblance was unmistakable. The same eyes, the same shape of jaw, the same slight tilt to her smile. "It's you," Lila whispered to the painting. "You're the one in my dreams. And you," a sharp voice said behind her, "are somewhere you absolutely should not be." Lila spun around. Lady Morgana, the head advisor, stood in the doorway with 2 guards flanking her. Her crimson dress seemed darker in the candlelight, like drying blood. "The hidden oracle's chamber," Morgana said, her voice dripping with malice. "Sealed by royal decree for 300 years. Only those of the bloodline can open its door." Her smile was all teeth. "You've just confirmed what I feared. You're not just some peasant girl. You're a threat to everything we've built." "I'm not a threat to anyone." Guards, seize her. "The king will want to know that his little experiment has been rating forbidden." "The king," Darius's voice cut through the room like a blade, "is already aware." He stood in the main library beyond, his face unreadable. But his eyes found the mural, found Lila standing before her ancestor's image, and something shifted in his expression. Understanding, recognition,
And fear.
"Leave us," he commanded. "All of you." "Your Majesty." She opened a sealed door. "Leave us." Morgana's face twisted with fury, but she bowed stiffly and withdrew, the guards following. When they were alone, Darius entered the hidden chamber and stared at the mural for a long moment. "I painted this," he said quietly. 300 years ago, from memory. I wanted to remember her face before time stole it from me." He looked at Lila. "I never thought I'd see it again. Not on canvas. Not in life." "You knew her? The first oracle?" "I killed her," Darius whispered. "And now her blood has returned to save my daughter from the very curse I helped create." Darius's confession hung in the air between them like smoke. "You killed her?" Lila's voice shook, but not entirely with fear. Anger mixed with something deeper. Grief for an ancestor she'd never known. Rage for a massacre she'd only learned about days ago. "I was young." Following orders, Darius stared at the mural, unable to meet Lila's eyes. "My father commanded it. He said the tear healers made us weak, that their compassion was poison to vampire strength. We burned the temple. Every healer inside. I told myself it was necessary. And now I would give anything to undo it." His fists clenched. "But the past is written in blood, and blood doesn't wash away. All I can do is..." The door burst open. Not just Morgana this time. 7 vampires swept into the library like a storm, their formal robes marking them as the Vampire Council, the ancient lords and ladies who governed alongside the king. Lord Vesper led them, his face twisted with contempt. "Your Majesty," he said, the title sounding like an insult. "We must speak.
Now."
This is not the time." Word has spread throughout the court. Lady Morgana stepped forward, her voice sharp with triumph. "You shelter a human with divine powers. A descendant of the Solara Order. The very bloodline we exterminated to preserve our dominion." Another council member, Lord Theron, pointed an accusing finger at Lila. "She's corrupting the princess. Weakening the royal curse that binds our power structure. If the curse breaks, the entire foundation of vampire society crumbles." "My daughter is dying from that curse," Darius said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Then she dies with honor." Lord Vesper slammed his staff against the floor. "Better that than contaminating our pure bloodline with human sentiment. This girl must be executed immediately. Tonight." Lila's blood ran cold. "You will not touch her." Darius moved to stand between Lila and the council, his presence suddenly overwhelming. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "We are not asking for permission," Morgana hissed. "The council has voted.
6-1.
The human dies, or we remove you from the throne and kill her anyway." "On what grounds?" "Treason. Witchcraft. Endangering the immortal realm." Lord Vesper smiled coldly. "Pick whichever you prefer for the execution decree." Darius's hand went to the sword at his hip, a weapon Lila hadn't even noticed he was carrying. "I am still your king." "A king who's grown soft," Theron sneered. "Blinded by fatherly love." You would sacrifice centuries of vampire supremacy for one child. Yes. The single word silenced them all. I would burn this entire court to ash for my daughter, Darius continued, his voice carrying absolute certainty. And if you think you can stop me, then try. The tension crackled like lightning about to strike. Then, from somewhere deep in the palace, a scream shattered the silence. A child's scream, full of agony. Serafina. Darius bolted from the library, Lila racing behind him. The council followed, their threats momentarily forgotten. They found the princess in her room, collapsed on the floor, convulsing. The black sigil had returned with a vengeance, darker than ever, spreading up her arm like poison ivy. Black veins radiated from it, crawling toward her heart. "Papa," she sobbed, her small body racked with pain. "It hurts. It hurts so much." Lila dropped to her knees beside the child, reaching for her hand, but the moment she touched the sigil, agony lanced through her own body. She cried out but didn't let go. "It's fighting back," she gasped. "The curse knows I've been weakening it. It's trying to." Serafina screamed again, and blood began trickling from her nose. "See." Morgana's voice was ice. "The human's interference has made it worse. The curse will kill the princess now, consuming her completely because it's been threatened. End the girl, and the curse stabilizes." "No." Serafina clutched Lila's hand even as pain racked them both. "Don't let them take her. Please, Papa." Darius looked between his dying daughter and the council surrounding them, and Lila saw the moment he made his choice. "Marcus," he roared. The head server appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. "Prepare 3 horses.
Food for week.
Pack light and fast." Darius scooped his daughter into his arms, and Lila saw that the black veins were still spreading. "We leave within the hour." "Your Majesty, you cannot." "I can and I will." He turned to face the council, his eyes blazing with power that made even the ancient vampires step back. "I'm taking my daughter and Lila to the sunken cathedral. The original curse seal is there. If there's any way to end this permanently, we'll find it. The sunken cathedral is forbidden." Lord Vesper sputtered. "The spectral guardians will kill you." "Then I die trying to save my child instead of living as a coward." Darius looked at Lila. "Will you come?" She stared at Serafina, still whimpering in pain, and thought of the first oracle in her dreams. "Only compassion breaks blood." "Yes. Then we have no time. The council will send assassins before dawn." He strode toward the door, then paused. "And anyone who tries to stop us will learn why I've ruled for 5 centuries." The threat hung in the air as they raced from the room. Behind them, Morgana's voice cut through the chaos. "So be it. The king has chosen treason. Hunt them down. Kill the human. Bring the princess back in chains." The hunt had begun. They fled the palace under a moonless sky, 3 horses galloping into darkness, while alarm bells rang behind them. Serafina rode with her father, wrapped in his cloak, her face pressed against his chest. Lila rode beside them, her inexperienced hands gripping the reins too tight. She'd never ridden a horse before yesterday, when Marcus had given her a frantic lesson in the stables. "They'll send blood trackers," Darius said as they plunged into the forest beyond the city walls. "They can follow our scent for miles. We need to reach the River of Sorrows by dawn and cross it. The running water will hide our trail." Lila's thighs already ached from riding, but she pushed the horse faster. Behind them, she could hear hunting horns, a sound that made her blood freeze. They rode for hours through twisted trees that seemed to lean in with grasping branches. Twice they heard howls that were definitely not wolves. Once, eyes gleamed red from the underbrush, but Darius simply bared his fangs and the creature melted back into shadow. By the time they reached the river, Serafina was burning with fever. "The curse is accelerating," Darius said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. He laid his daughter on the riverbank while Lila collapsed beside them, every muscle screaming. Being separated from the palace, from the source of vampire power, it's making everything worse. Let me try something. Lila placed her hands on either side of Seraphina's face. The little girl's skin felt like fire. In my dreams, the oracle didn't just touch.
She
gave something. Warmth.
light.
Let me try. She closed her eyes and thought of everything she loved about this child. Her brave smile, her gentle heart, the way she'd held onto Lila even when everyone else told her to let go. She thought of her own sister at that age, of every child who deserved to grow up without pain. Something stirred deep in her chest, a warmth that grew and grew until it spilled down her arms, into her palms, flowing into Seraphina like water into dry earth. The black sigil began to glow, but this time with golden light pushing back the darkness. Seraphina's eyes fluttered open. "It's warm," she whispered. "Like sunshine. I haven't felt sunshine in so long." The fever broke. The black veins receded slightly. It wasn't a cure. The curse still crawled beneath her skin, but it bought them time. Darius stared at Lila with something like awe. "You're channeling it. The tear healer power. You're actually learning to control it." "I don't know what I'm doing," Lila admitted. "I just feel what she needs and try to give it." That's exactly what they did. The Order of Solara, he looked away. I'd forgotten what it looked like. Real compassion. Not the calculated mercy we vampires practice when it serves us, but genuine care for another's suffering. They crossed the river at dawn and continued into the mistwood, a forest so thick with fog that Lila couldn't see 10 feet ahead. Here, they encountered their first village. It was small, barely a dozen buildings, occupied by humans who lived in the wild spaces between vampire territories. They looked half-starved and wary, but when they saw Seraphina's condition, an old woman brought water and bread without being asked. "Poor child," she murmured, brushing hair from the princess's face. "So young to carry such darkness." "We can pay," Darius began, reaching for his coin purse. "Keep your money, vampire," but the woman's voice wasn't cruel, just tired. "I had a daughter once. She didn't survive her illness. I won't turn away another mother's child, regardless of who her father is." Lila saw something crack in Darius's expression. He nodded silently, accepting the kindness he likely didn't think he deserved. They rested for an hour before moving on. As they prepared to leave, a boy no older than 12 tugged on Lila's sleeve. "Miss, there are blood trackers 2 hours behind you. I saw them from my tree post. You should hurry." "Thank you," Lila said, pressing a coin into his hand anyway. The boy looked at it, then at Darius. "You're the king, aren't you? I've seen your face on the tax notices." Darius tensed, hand moving to his sword. "I won't tell," the boy said quickly. "My sister says you're cruel. But anyone who runs to save their kid instead of sacrificing them to stay powerful. Maybe you're learning not to be." He darted away before Darius could respond. They rode harder after that, Lila channeling warmth into Seraphina every few hours to keep the curse at bay. With each healing, she felt stronger, more certain. The power wasn't foreign anymore. It was waking up, remembering itself through her. On the third night, they helped a traveling vampire merchant whose carriage had broken down. He didn't recognize Darius in his travel-stained clothes, and Lila watched the king work alongside her to fix the wheel, his immortal strength making short work of the task. "You're kind for humans," the merchant said to Lila, assuming Darius was her husband. "And you, sir, are quite strong for a mortal." After he left, Darius was quiet for a long time. "I've ruled for 500 years, he finally said as they made camp. "I've commanded armies, negotiated treaties, executed traitors. But I've never fixed a stranger's carriage just because it was the right thing to do. I'd forgotten that was even an option." "It's never too late to remember," Lila said softly. On the fourth day, through the clearing mist, they saw it. The sunken cathedral rose from the earth like a broken prayer, half its towers buried, its walls covered in creeping vines that glowed faintly in the twilight. Around its perimeter, translucent figures drifted, spectral monks still walking their ancient paths, bound to guard the cursed seal even in death. "We're here," Darius whispered. Seraphina stirred in his arms. "Papa? I can feel something. Something old and angry." "The source of the curse," Lila said, that inexplicable knowing rising in her again. The place where it all began. They had arrived at the heart of darkness. Now, they had to find the light within it. The spectral monks didn't attack immediately. They simply watched as Darius, Lila, and Seraphina approached the cathedral's massive doors. The ghosts' faces held no malice, only infinite sadness, as if they'd been waiting centuries for someone to finally end their vigil. They're trapped, Lila realized, bound by the same curse they're guarding. One monk, the tallest, with a face that might have been kind in life, gestured toward the entrance. An invitation, not a threat. The doors groaned open. Inside, the cathedral was both magnificent and heartbreaking. Shattered stained glass littered the floor like fallen stars. Pews had crumbled into dust. But at the far end, somehow untouched by time, stood an altar carved from white stone. Above it, a single beam of moonlight pierced through the ruined ceiling, illuminating a circular seal embedded in the floor. The moment they stepped toward it, Seraphina convulsed. "Papa." Blood poured from her nose, her ears. The black sigil exploded across her entire body, wrapping around her throat like strangling hands. I can't breathe." "No." Darius fell to his knees, cradling his daughter as she seized. "Not now. We're so close." Lila rushed forward, but when she tried to channel her warmth, the curse lashed back. Pain exploded through her skull, driving her to the ground. The curse was too strong here, too close to its source. "Lila." Seraphina's voice was fading. "I'm scared." "I know, sweetheart. I know." Tears blurred Lila's vision as she crawled toward them. Then the light came. It bloomed from the altar like a flower opening, coalescing into a form Lila recognized instantly, the woman from her dreams. The first oracle of tears, more vivid than ever, her presence filling the ruined cathedral with warmth that pushed back the shadows. "You came," the spirit said, her voice echoing with joy and sorrow intertwined. "After all this time, my blood returned. Help her." Darius begged, and Lila had never heard a vampire sound so broken. "Please, whatever price you want, I'll pay it. Just save my daughter." "The price was already paid," the oracle said, turning to him. 500 years ago, when you burned my temple, when you killed my sisters, when you chose power over love." Darius bowed his head. "I know, and I deserve damnation for it. Perhaps. But your daughter does not." The oracle knelt beside Seraphina, her translucent hand hovering over the child's face. "Listen well. The curse you think is magic, it is not. It never was." "What?" Lila struggled to understand. "But the sigil, the dark power, are manifestations of something far older than sorcery." The oracle's eyes held ancient pain. "The curse was born from vengeance. When you slaughtered us, Darius, one of my sisters survived long enough to speak a dying wish. Not a spell, a truth." She stood, her form flickering like a candle flame. She said, "Those who rule through fear will feed their children to that fear. Those who choose power over compassion will watch their bloodline consume itself." It wasn't magic. It was prophecy. The universe simply agreed. Darius looked stricken. "Then how do we end it?" "The same way it began." With a choice, the oracle looked between them. One of royal vampire blood and one of Solara descent must share an act of pure compassion. Not calculated mercy. Not love given expecting something in return. Pure, selfless compassion, the very thing that was murdered in this place. Seraphina's breathing grew shallow. The black veins were reaching her heart. "We're running out of time." Lila's hands shook. "Then choose quickly," the oracle said, beginning to fade. "Remember, child of my blood, you cannot destroy darkness. You can only remind it of the light it once was." And she was gone. Lila looked at Seraphina, this little girl who'd done nothing to deserve this fate. She thought of all the children like her, suffering from curses they didn't create, paying for the sins of their ancestors. I understand, she whispered. She crawled to Seraphina and carefully lifted the child's head into her lap. The curse burned against her skin, trying to push her away, but Lila held on. She cradled the dying princess like she'd cradled her own baby sister during thunderstorms, like her mother had once held her. It's okay, she murmured, smoothing Seraphina's sweat-soaked hair. You're not alone. You're never alone. And then, because her heart was breaking for this child, because she genuinely couldn't bear to watch her suffer, Lila cried. A single tear fell onto the black sigil on Seraphina's wrist. Where it landed, light bloomed. Blood, Darius breathed, suddenly understanding. It needs blood and tears. Vampire and human. Power and compassion united. Without hesitation, he bit his own palm and pressed it over the place where Lila's tear had fallen. The reaction was instantaneous. Light and shadow exploded outward, not fighting but merging. Darkness remembering it had once been light, power remembering it had once served love. The black sigil shattered like glass, and where it had been, a new mark appeared, a teardrop cradled by hands, with a small sun rising behind it. The symbol from Lila's dreams. The mark of Solara. Seraphina gasped, her eyes flying open. The black veins vanished. Color returned to her cheeks. Papa, she whispered. It doesn't hurt anymore. Around them, the spectral monks began to dissolve, their faces finally at peace. Their vigil was over. The curse had ended not with destruction, but with the remembering of what had been lost, the simple, profound truth that compassion was stronger than vengeance. That love, in the end, always won. 6 weeks later, something impossible happened in the vampire lands. The sun rose. Not the pale, filtered twilight that vampires tolerated, but actual golden sunlight, the first true dawn seen in the Crimson Court territories in 3 generations. When the first rays touched the palace courtyard, the vampires didn't burn. The ancient curse that had forced them into shadow had lifted with Seraphina's healing, as if the two had always been connected. Darius stood at his window, watching light paint the world in colors he'd forgotten existed, and felt something he hadn't experienced in 5 centuries. Hope. In the courtyard below, Seraphina laughed, a sound that had become wonderfully common, as she chased butterflies through the garden. The mark on her wrist glowed faintly golden in the sunlight, no longer a curse, but a reminder. A symbol of the day, everything changed. Your Majesty, Marcus appeared in the doorway. The representatives have arrived. Both delegations. Already? I thought we had another hour. They're eager, sire. Word of the Unity Council has spread far. Everyone wants to see if it's real. Darius smiled slightly. Then, let's not keep them waiting. The grand hall had been transformed. Gone were the chandeliers of frozen blood crystals, replaced by ordinary candles and oil lamps. The throne remained, but beside it now sat 2 additional chairs, one for the human representative, one for the newly appointed High Oracle of Unity. Lila still wasn't used to that title. She stood in her chambers, no longer the servants' quarters, but rooms befitting her position, adjusting the white robes that felt too formal, too important. The symbol of Solara was embroidered over her heart in gold thread. You look terrified, Seraphina said from the doorway, grinning. The princess visited her every morning now, sometimes for lessons, sometimes just to talk. I am terrified, Lila laughed shakily. 6 weeks ago, I was serving wine. Now I'm supposed to teach vampire and human healers how to channel compassion into power. What if I can't do it? You'll do it the same way you saved me. Seraphina took her hand, the gesture now familiar and comforting. By caring more about helping people than about being afraid. Wise words from a 6-year-old. Together, they walked to the grand hall. The gathering was unlike anything Lila had seen. 50 representatives filled the room, 25 vampires, 25 humans, all seated together at long tables. No separation. No hierarchy. When Darius had issued the decree reforming the Crimson Court into a council of peace, half his own advisors had resigned in protest. Lady Morgana and Lord Vesper had fled to the southern territories, gathering those who refused to accept the new order. There would be resistance. Perhaps even war eventually. But today, in this room, peace was possible. "Welcome," Darius said, his voice carrying authority that no longer relied on fear. "We gather today not as masters and servants, but as two peoples learning to remember what we once knew, that our strength lies in unity, not domination." He gestured to Lila, who stepped forward, her heart pounding. "The High Oracle of Unity will now explain the healing programs we're establishing in both territories." Lila took a breath and began. She spoke of training centers where humans with Solara blood, and they'd found 12 so far, descendants who'd hidden their gifts, would teach empathic healing. She explained how vampires' strength and human compassion could work together, each complementing the other. As she spoke, she saw skeptical faces gradually soften. Not everyone. Some vampires still sneered. Some humans still flinched when vampires moved too quickly. But it was a start. After the formal speeches ended, the real work began. Committees forming, resources being allocated, tentative handshakes between ancient enemies. Lila moved through the crowd, answering questions, demonstrating small healings, showing both peoples that compassion wasn't weakness, it was the strongest magic that existed. As evening fell and the first stars appeared, she found herself alone on the eastern balcony, exhausted but satisfied. "You did well today," Darius joined her, 2 glasses of wine in hand. He offered her one. "The human delegates trust you. Even some of the vampires are starting to. It's not enough. Not yet. Rome wasn't built in a day. Neither will our new world be." He looked out over the city where lanterns were lighting in both vampire and human districts. "I've made many proclamations today, but there's one I wanted you to hear first." He turned to face her fully. "I'm changing the kingdom's motto. The old one was power through eternity. The new one will be power is eternal only when compassion guides it." Lila felt tears prick her eyes. The first oracle would approve. "I hope so. I hope she—" He stopped, staring at Lila's face. "What? What is it?" "Behind you," he whispered. Lila turned. There, faint as moonlight, the spirit of the first oracle stood at the balcony's edge. She wasn't solid, more like a memory given temporary form, but her smile was radiant and real. She looked at Lila with infinite pride, then at Darius with forgiveness he'd never thought he'd receive. And then she spoke, her voice barely a whisper on the wind. "The curse ended the moment you wiped her tears. Everything else was just the world catching up to what compassion had already made true." And with that, she faded, her purpose fulfilled, her vigil finally over. Lila touched her cheek and found it wet. But these were good tears, the kind that came from joy, from relief, from knowing that sometimes, against all odds, broken things could be made whole again. In the courtyard below, Seraphina's laughter rang out like bells. And for the first time in 500 years, King Darius laughed too.